9 o'clock because I'm really bad in the morning times. You can, okay.
We want a bit of space.
Yeah, we need a bit of space. So we'll probably kick into it. Sorry, it's very bright. Is everybody kind of awake? Yeah, okay. Okay, great. What I did do was I brought a couple of notes because I really don't function well in the mornings, and I'm apparently have to do a better job at kind of setting the scene for this. So I know we're all very, very aware of what's going on in the tech sector at the moment, and we're not going to sit and dwell. We're going to talk about the layoffs and what's happening there, but we're not going to dwell on it too much. But I wanted to kind of set the scene as to where we're at. So I grabbed a couple of bits of data. So in 2022, guys, we had 161,000 layoffs. Again, it's hard to find this data like completely accurately. And in 2023, in the month so far, when I checked last night on layoffs.io, we're at 126,500 in 468 companies. So it just tells you the scale of what's happening in the tech industry. And I think what was really interesting, and I want to explore that with David and Stephanie, is of that group, actually the majority of people that laid off are not even in tech jobs. And Lars, I know you wrote a piece in this recently. I read that, so I'm just going to cog it for this session. But of that, just under 28% were in the HR and the TA world, and we'll explore why. 22% were engineers, 7% marketing, just under 5% CS, and again, another 5% for PR, comms, and strategy. And what's interesting, even if you take the typical profile of the laid-off worker, we have about 56% being female, about 48% between that 30 to 40-year bracket. Obviously, most of them US-based, with an average tenure of 2.5 years in their job. So I think that that's kind of an interesting scene setting as to what's been going on. So let's just launch into it. What the hell happened and why? So so can we talk a little bit about the layoffs and their impact and what it might mean? So I'll throw it open maybe to Stephanie. I'll let you go first maybe if that's all right.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks a million. Good morning, everyone. First, I just want to say thanks for braving the weather. I know we all had to make that choice this morning. I'm very excited to see my own team made it because on a normal working day, I've been getting I'm working from home today. So appreciate y'all made it out. Look, I think we just need to take a little bit of a step back and suck in everything that's going on around the environment. The reality is there's a lot happening, right? There's a lot happening, and the headline is layoff, but step back, look at it. As HR people, what we need to be asking is why? Why did this happen? What are the impacts, and what do we learn from it? And I suppose even more important than that, how do we do our jobs differently?
Yeah.
How do we add more value from a business perspective? How do we, at a time where I think it's around 25% of the layoffs are HR people, how do we become more relevant? And my thoughts on that are, when you look at what's gone on in tech, so you've got lots of big tech out there saying, we're sorry, we overhired, hands up on that.
Yeah.
That's one major factor. But another really significant factor, particularly for the smaller tech out there, is it's just a lot more costly to do business at the moment. That's a fact. Inflation rates are at an all-time high. 4 or 5 years ago, money was free. So you could hire, you could run at a rate where your costs were, higher than they would be today, and nobody batted an eyelid. And the main reason for that is the objective was growth. So the objective in tech for the last number of years has been growth. But it's not anymore. The objective is profitability. And particularly if you look at private equity, that's what they're interested in. Valuation's all on profitability. Big tech then, look at the amount of equity that has been released. Look at the funds that have gone off the table, right? And when you're trying to solve for profitability, the answer is easy. You look at your run rate, you look at your burn rate, you look at your net costs, and then you try to figure out where do you make savings. And how do you as a business become more efficient? And I think that's what's happening in big tech. That's the questions that are filtering down to smaller tech. And as we're seeing in the market at the moment, it's filtering outside of that. We've had a lot of layoffs in banking recently. We're seeing some manufacturing starting to announce layoffs as well, Black & Decker being the latest. It's a natural question. If I'm trying to get to profitability, what are my costs? How do I pull back? And the bigger question on this, and the bigger question we need to answer as HR people, is what does that mean going forward? And the questions that we've never asked a whole lot of in tech, how productive are we? How many people do we need to produce? Why? what should our workforce plans look like? You know, we talk about all this, and I've had lots of conversations with people over the years, and it tends to get a little bit fluffy. And we've got to get more tangible and harder on those questions in terms of how have we shaped our organization? What are our spans? What are our layers? Where do we get the most value? Where do we have parts of the organization that aren't delivering? Actually, do we even need those functions? And that's the reality that we're in. And I think when the dust settles on all this, if it ever settles, in the next 18 months or so, the question's going to be asked, can tech run more efficiently? Have we proven it? And if the answer is yes, then this is coming at us again.
David, I'd bring you in there.
Yeah. Well, pre-pandemic, I worked for the guy with the beard, big up there. Still looks scary on a big screen. So I was in the Salesforce ecosystem what I'll call sort of 1.0, the pre-pandemic. And then pandemic time was sort of 2.0.
Yeah.
And now we're in this 3.0 world. So I'm actually going to do a dramatic reenactment for you.
Okay, please do.
So 1.0, hiring software engineers was like this. Roll the doors open. Everybody in, come on. And they all ran in. And you're hiring like 50 software engineers in a go. And now, post-pandemic, it's like you kind of open the door a crack. You got a clipboard and you're like, I'm hiring 5 software engineers. And before, you could hire 50 of them and 5 of them wouldn't work out. And you'd have, 45 great ones, 5 okay ones, and you'd work on. Well, those 5 now that we have to hire are critical.
Yeah.
And to Steph's point, the calculus that's being used to evaluate our performance in the people organization is much different. And so our job has fundamentally changed. Whereas before we were all, culture ambassadors and culture builders and how many ping pong tables do you need, per dogs in the office.
There's a ratio
there. Really important Silicon Valley metrics here. How many Kermit the Frog socks are you giving out? And that's changed a lot now.
Yeah.
It's what is our productivity per employee? A lot of precision on how long does it take one of our sales representatives to get to meet their quota? Things that in the past were important, but they were down the stack. And that has sort of flipped upside down now.
Yeah. And we talked about this yesterday, right? That's a bit of the harsh reality of this, is that I think that we have to take it as leaders on the chin, right? Because people didn't hire themselves, right? Cash was free. We know that. Interest rates at close near zero. Yeah. So money was cheap, right? And it was this money for growth. And there wasn't enough thinking about that, for sure. It's a very, very hard transition for people overnight to suddenly be like, oh shit, now it's all about productivity and yada, yada, yada. So what do you think are the real practical impacts of that particularly on the psychological contract with people? Because for sure, and I have personal questions about, I hear you that we have to be more cost sensitive. As an entrepreneur, you're always looking, right? Bottom line, right? Cash flow, where are we at? But let's call a spade a spade. Not all of these companies are making losses. These companies are making choices to lose people, right? And I'm not saying they should or they shouldn't, but I'm just saying these are companies that are still posting record profits. And there does appear to be very little consideration, which I think I'd love to explore with you guys, about like redeployment, reskill. Could I be more intentional? Because it was interesting, we did a lot of work in Dogpatch to try support affected people. So we're very much in the kind of startup and innovation ecosystem. And what really interested in me was there were a number of people that came to us being like, I'm laid off, and they were going through all the emotion that comes with that. And then the following week, 3 of them were like, oh, we've been hired back. And if anything said to me, yeah, wow, that was really thoughtful. So I guess what I'm curious is like, it's great. Big tech has had some come to Jesus moment of actually we need a P&L and it matters, right? Great. But they're still taking bonuses at a C-suite level. They're still making record profits. What does this mean for human beings? Because we're supposed to be the advocates for the business as a whole, and that includes the people. So I guess I'd push that to you guys and go, let's talk about that. What does that mean? Real terms.
I think the fundamental employer-employee contract has shifted.
Yeah.
I mean, before, I think I felt like employees had a bit more control because there were a lot of opportunities out there.
Yeah.
And now, we've done these layoffs, and the reality is actually people are still hiring.
Yep.
So talent still has a vote.
Yeah.
While I think some of us in leadership roles kind of feel like, oh, the calculus has shifted now and we can call the shots again, I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that ultimately the gig economy has now reached knowledge workers.
Yeah.
And our people, each of us maybe, feel like independent contractors of our own careers.
Yeah.
And we're going to our companies and saying, what's in it for me? I'm looking for authenticity, transparency, clarity, candor. Explain to me the business decisions you're making. And if you're making record profits in these layoffs, at least explain to me where you're reinvesting. Help me understand that. So I think we're being held to account more by our workforces, which I think is a good thing. I think that's a return to some fundamentals of good, solid leadership principles as we've got our companies.
Yeah. Sorry, Stephanie, you're going to come in.
Yeah, like really what you're describing is trust has been eroded.
Yeah.
And it absolutely has, right? Like and there's no point saying, there's no point trying to defend it or saying that it hasn't. But what you've got to be in those times, you talked about candor, you talked about openness, honest, and you've got to help people understand that, you know, you've made some decisions in the past that maybe now, you know, with hindsight being a great thing, you've learned you do things differently, and now you're starting to do them differently. And I think you just got to be open and honest with people and start to rebuild that, right? And in terms of that push and pull that we've been talking about today and yesterday in terms of this conference on a tug of war, that type of mentality isn't actually going to get us anywhere.
Yeah.
Like that's the wrong mentality. Sorry, Robbie.
Whole conference is scrapped.
It's just
Go home, everyone.
it's just not going to help, right? Because if I push on you or I pull on you, what are you going to do? You're going to lean in or you're going to lean back, right?
Yeah.
And if you lean back, it's that dynamic of the relationship between the company or the leader and the employee. We're just going to erode it, right? And the reality is what you've got to do and what we've got to figure out as HR practitioners is like, have we lost trust? What did we lose it? Why did we lose it? How did we get it back? And the only way we can do that is to listen to people and be really open and honest with them around where we landed. And
Nice.
I mean, the points you're making, I don't want to skirt it, like the points that you're making on, but look at all these big bonuses, and that's a fact of life. I mean, we're not going to sit up on stage and talk to everyone and talk about changing that. And do I think we should change it? Probably not. Like, that's the other point, right? So these people are in these positions to make these decisions, and at the end of the day, you got to trust them to do it. And if they mess up, they got to tell us why. And if they want to course correct, they got to tell us why. And then, as an employee, as an adult, you've got to decide, well, is this the place I want to be or not? Do I trust them enough?
So you talked about what we do to build trust. What is the way out of this, right? Because we've talked a lot about the realities of it. What is the way out of this? How do we build the trust? How do we get back there? If the psychological contract has shifted, how do we do that? Should I throw it open?
Let's ask somebody. That's a hard ask question. That was not in the prep session.
I think part of what I heard from Stephanie, though, is honest conversations, right? And part of what I think I heard was actually like engaging with the teams in that and having these open conversations. Is there...
You know, I pause on that question, right? Because the reality is, if I know the answer to that and I can answer it in two sentences, I shouldn't be sitting here today. I should probably be in California with yourself and making loads of money, right? Like
David's on the big
reality, right? Like,
I can't even afford proper socks, for God's sake.
That is the reality, right? And you gotta. There's no one size fits all. Every organization is different. Every organization has their own culture. We've broken some of the cultural norms, right? The question is, do we want to even repair them? Or are they the new cultural norms? And then you operate within that ecosystem, and that's how life is in that organization. So I don't think there's like a one-size-fits-all answer to the question. I think it's a good question, but the reality is it's going to be different for every organization. It's going to be different for every CEO. It's going to be different for every chief people officer. But the intention, as long as and I do believe that 90% of the time, all people are good, and we don't mean to do harm or put people in bad situations. And if we approach our jobs like that, we'll get to a better place.
Nice. So what do you think that this means kind of globally for the tech sector? Like, I mean, maybe I'll start with David, if it's all right, Stephanie, on that one, just if you think with your kind of global hat out, and then we might come down to what does that mean then for the Irish tech sector? Do we have any advantage or any edge here?
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think this means for us?
I think part of it is it's a lesson we learned in the pandemic that we should not forget. And one of the few things I loved about the pandemic is we all got really human really quickly. So I worked from our house like everybody did at the time. And the room where I kept my office was where the kids had their bath. And so I'd be on a call talking about something very official like compa ratios or dilution or some arcane HR thing. And board meeting, doesn't matter. The kids would come in for their bath and see this little pair of buns walk across the screen. And it's hard to maintain your composure while your naked child is running behind you screaming about bath time. But what it did was it made us very human as leaders. It's like, this is my home, this is my family. I don't do the virtual background thing. It's whatever's there is there. Whatever happens, happens, and I don't apologize for it. And so that connection with humanity, I think, is a really important part for us as people leaders, all of us, and to remember that. And I think that's what's going to lead us not out of this, but into the new world, across technology in particular.
Yeah.
That at the end of the day, we are human beings connecting with other human beings. We happen to build software. And I think that's one of the things that we recognize significantly in a lot of these companies. We certainly feel it in Intercom, and I think it plays into the next part of your question around this Irish advantage. So. Yeah.
Stephanie, what do you think? Do you think it's the same for Ireland? Do you think there's any differences? Do you think there is any advantage you think we have? Or I throw it out to either of you, actually, whoever.
I think the big advantage we have, and we've had it over the last 20 years or so, we've got a very talented workforce. I think the challenge we have, and it's a far bigger challenge than everyone in this room can solve it. It's not easy to keep people in Ireland at the moment. We've got a lot of really strong homegrown talent. We've got a lot of talent come in, particularly with multinationals over the last couple of years. I mean, prior to where I am now, I worked with PayPal and eBay, and I loved nothing more than traveling around the world. I lived in San Jose for a while. I lived in Zurich, and I loved nothing more when people would tell me about, oh, Dublin, that's a tech hub for Europe, right? Like, that was fantastic, right? And what we've got to figure out is, like, how do we keep that sticky? Because we've got the homegrown talent. We have talent who's come in over the years. Well, they want to stay in Ireland. A lot of social issues at the moment. Housing is a challenge, major challenge. Like, it's underestimated when you just say challenge, right?
100%.
But so I think our position is strong from a talent perspective, and we've got to rally around it and make it sticky. Don't ask me how we do that. That'd be worse than the last question.
And David, what are your thoughts? And I'll come in. I had some thoughts on the kind of ecosystem as a whole, but what are your thoughts about that?
So our largest single office in Intercom is here in Ireland. We're Irish founded, and so we've got 450 people here in Dublin. And as I joined the company, this was the first Irish company I'd gotten the chance to be a part of. And as I've really thought through it, the Irish tech advantage is in this frame. And I understand I'm generalizing. I do believe this to be a real advantage, though. The Irish tech industry is one of the most educated in the world, concentration density-wise. Just sharp, sharp minds who are very warm and welcoming as people from a cultural perspective. And that builds culture very well and builds community inside of organizations. The real advantage is with that, people will call you out on your shit or your shite, depending upon what you're talking.
Naturalized.
Yeah. And it's true. It's an eye to quality.
Yeah.
It's an eye to thoughtfulness. It's an eye to good design and good outcomes that avoids a lot of what we get trapped on the Silicon Valley side of this ruinous empathy, as Scott would call it, about, oh, it's grand, you're doing wonderful, it's nothing to change, perfect, and then no one uses the damn thing. It's like, what happened? Oh, that feature was crap. Well, why didn't you tell me that when we were getting ready to ship it? And I think the Irish tech industry is very good at doing that in a building kind of way that is a differentiator, unlike any other tech hub that I've seen anywhere in the world.
Yeah, nice. I think what's interesting in the play out in all of this for me is maybe I'm just sitting in a slightly different part of the world now, is that there's a circularity within the whole ecosystem, right? So there's what FDIs do when they come here, then there's what happens in a kind of like, we'll say the more Irish kind of SMB market, and that's great. And then there's also what happens within the startup ecosystem, right? And what's really interesting is that they all feed each other, like quite seamlessly, right? So we actually need all of those for it to be a healthy ecosystem. So I've been really fascinated with seeing the number of people who, to be honest, have come out quite disillusioned out of the tech layoff piece, right? And I get it, like on a human level, I understand that. And so what we're starting to see, and we've actually always seen this in any times of recession, any kind of big economic impact, you actually start to see a lot of really good startups bubble up. And we're already starting to see that come through the accelerators, like the NDRC accelerators, is just the number of startups that are coming out of people that have spun out of the kind of the larger tech. And what interests me is how the circularity in it all, right? So I think that, yeah, look, there's a lot of things that are crap about what's going on, right? There's no doubt about it. But I think what's really interesting is it is starting to bubble up in other ways. And I think Stephanie made a really good point, is it's a little bit about return to basics, return to kind of foundational values. So I think that if this stimulates the other parts of the ecosystem, it can't be a bad thing. And with that, we are going to finish up and be right on time for once in my life. Yeah. Thanks, Rob.